Okay, my son Daniel was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder when he was 6, but I'd known long before then that there was something wrong. He was a fretful and anxious baby who rarely slept, and as a toddler he was constantly on the go. You've all seen a child like my son. He was the one who was running round and round the room at toddler group, climbing up the shelves to get the toy off the top, pouring paint on the floor of the art room, knocking down the other children's Lego towers. At story time I had to wrestle him to the ground to get him to sit still. And even then, he'd be calling things out and just generally disrupting the group. He's a caring, funny, quirky little boy with a charming smile and a wicked sense of humour. But he had some strange obsessions. He had a purple teddy bear called Strum, and Strum went everywhere with him. He couldn't go to sleep if he didn't have Strum at night. One day, we left Strum at a motorway service station, and I did a 60-mile round trip to go and get him, because I knew that bedtime would be a nightmare without him. He was also obsessed with Only Fools and Horses, and he knew some of the episodes word for word, which was all well and good until the day when he told one of my friends to "Shut up, you tart," which was just mortifying. But there was a darker side to Daniel's nature as well. He couldn't concentrate on anything for more than a few minutes, and he was very easily distracted. At mealtimes, he'd stop with the fork halfway between the plate and his mouth, and I'd have to remind him to eat. And in the morning, I'd give him his clothes and come back 5 minutes later to find him standing there with one leg in, one leg out of his trousers, because some toy or game had caught his attention. But the worst thing were the tantrums. He was a bit like Jekyll and Hyde. He'd turned from being my lovely, sweet little boy to being this kind of mini Incredible Hulk, who would just flip at anything, and he'd stand there shaking and rant and rage. His tantrums went on for hours, or sometimes he'd have several in a day. And he lashed out at anyone or anything who got in his way. Our home was full of holes in the walls, and my daughter and I were constantly covered in bruises as a result of Dan's meltdowns. He started at nursery, and he just seemed not to fit in with the other children. He was out of sync with them, and his domineering personality caused some problems. At the end of the year, his teacher said that maybe I should go and see my doctor. She felt that there was more to his behaviour than just normal toddler tantrums, and I agreed. So the GP referred us to a paediatrician, and the paediatrician said Daniel was borderline ADHD. Meant nothing to me. He started at school in reception class, and there were problems straight away. He couldn't sit still, he couldn't concentrate on the work, and he couldn't resist telling the teacher when he thought she was wrong, which was pretty much all the time. The school put him on the school action level of support, but they didn't actually give him any extra help, and he very quickly started falling behind his friends. He got very frustrated because he couldn't cope in class, and that meant that the meltdowns got worse. They moved him to the School Action Plus level of support, and they called on the behaviour support team, who came in and gave him some anger management sessions, and that really seemed to make a difference. But after 6 weeks, the support was withdrawn, and his behaviour deteriorated very quickly. The school's response was to send him home, 16 times in 20 days at one time. And when I asked the teacher if they could provide extra support, maybe through a statement of needs, the head teacher laughed at me. She told me that there was nothing wrong with Daniel and that it was bad parenting. This was despite his sister being at the same school and being an A-star pupil. The final straw came when Daniel threw a chair across the room towards the teacher. Luckily, it missed her, but the school excluded him to the end of the summer term. During the holidays, I went in and we had a meeting to discuss his return to school in September, but it was very obvious that the school actually didn't want him back. The head teacher told me that she was going to permanently exclude him, this was at the age of 6, because it was the only way that he could get the help he needed. I was horrified, but finally I had acknowledgement that he did need extra support, but at what price? Following the exclusion, I went back to my doctor and I begged him for a referral back to the paediatrician. And eventually we were seen, and Daniel was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and autistic traits. ADHD is a genetic biological condition that affects the parts of the brain that control things like memory, focus, concentration. It also can lead to hyperactivity and impulsiveness. And when you put all those things together, it's quite an explosive mix, which is what I was discovering. It affects 5% of kids in the UK, 5% of children. That's about 500,000 kids in the UK. And it can lead to all sorts of problems. Children with ADHD are much more likely to fail academically. About 80% of children have difficulty in school. 1 in 4 children with ADHD will have some involvement with the police before the age of 12. and about 70% of children with ADHD go on to have symptoms in adult life as well. It's also common for children with ADHD to have other conditions like autistic spectrum disorders, anxiety disorder, depression, dyspraxia, dyslexia. So it's very difficult to diagnose, and it's even more difficult to manage. Daniel's paediatrician, following diagnosis, recommended initially that we try omega-3 and various exclusion diets, but they didn't really make any difference, and eventually he was prescribed medication, the dreaded Ritalin. It wasn't a magic cure, but it did make a huge difference. It meant that finally Daniel seemed to be able to stop and think before he acted. Not all the time, but the meltdowns and the defiance did seem to recede. However, medication was the only thing we were offered. We weren't told about behavioural therapies or support groups or any other support that might have helped us. Daniel spent the next year at our local pupil referral unit. And while I was concerned about the lack of academic progress that he made, they did offer him one-to-one support for his anger and also for his poor social skills. But it seemed that it had taken things getting as bad as they could get for him actually to get any sort of help. He was only part-time, very part-time. Unfortunately, I was studying a degree as a mature student at the time. I say fortunately because when your child's only in education for 2 hours a day, it would be very difficult to hold down a job. I was lucky that I had a friend who helped me, came round and looked after Daniel when I was at university. Except I did have a phone call from her one day saying, "Alison, I'm stuck in the bathroom. Daniel's outside with a plastic guitar and he said he's going to kill me." I'm very glad to have had some really supportive friends. The following year we moved counties, and Daniel got a fresh start at a small village school. As I'd feared, he'd fallen behind academically, but they were very supportive and very keen to help him. He was put on an accelerated learning programme, and soon he was working at the same level as his peers. In fact, he was on the Able Child Register for maths. He was on the school football team, he had some friends, and life was good for a while. But then the novelty of our new situation began to wear off, and the impulsive behaviour, the distractedness and the meltdowns started to increase. One day Daniel dropped a packet of Yu-Gi-Oh cards in a puddle. No big deal, you'd think. But for some reason he thought it was my fault. And the meltdown that followed was one of the worst I've ever experienced. At one point, he came running at me with the metal tin that he kept them in. He hit me in the face with it, and it cut me just here. As soon as he saw the blood pouring down my face, he calmed down, and he was horrified at what he'd done. But it was a scary experience for us both, and I started to worry about what the future held for him. He was also struggling at school, and while they did their best to support him, with limited funding available, there wasn't a great deal they could do. One day I was called into school to assist. Daniel had got into a fight with a boy over a game of tag, and they'd locked him in an office with 3 members of staff trying to calm him down. It was rather like having an angry tiger in a cage and going in and poking it with a stick. Every time they told him to calm down, he got more angry, and eventually he tried to kick his way out of the room, but he only succeeded in kicking the members of staff. He was permanently excluded with immediate effect, and the school were also advised to report it to the police. I had to take Dan to our local police station, where he sat in an interview room for 40 minutes, being questioned on an assault charge. He was just 10 years old. Fortunately, no charges were made, but as I drove home with my small son sobbing in the back of the car, I was terrified for his future. All I could picture was a life of violence and crime, more police interviews, visits to prison. But once again, it seemed the case that support appeared when things hit rock bottom. I was offered a place on a parenting course, and Daniel was finally, hooray, assessed for a statement of special needs and given a place in special school, and it's been the making of him. Finally, he was in a place where the teachers understood him and the way he worked, and they could deliver education to him in a way that he could access it. For 5 years, he thrived. He did well in his lessons, he took some GCSEs early, he took part in sports, made friends, and had some amazing experiences through the school, like going deep-sea fishing and on a trip to Barcelona. He also learned strategies to manage his behaviour, to the extent that now he's actually stopped taking medication, which is a massive achievement for him. The school's motto at the time was giving children a second chance, and that's what Daniel got, though actually it was a third chance for him. It wasn't all plain sailing, though. Last summer, Daniel suffered 2 enormous losses in his life. His favourite teacher left the school, and his father died very suddenly. Daniel claimed he was okay, but over several weeks his behaviour started to deteriorate and he started to fail academically. This was in his final year of his GCSEs. I was really concerned, but the school said he had a bad attitude and there wasn't anything they could do to help him. Once again, it took things getting as bad as they could get before anything was offered. One day he told a teacher that his life was so bad he might as well kill himself. Cue panic stations. We got an emergency referral back to our paediatrician at CAMS, which led to an offer of antidepressants. He turned them down, an additional diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, and the intervention of a specialist counsellor who made a huge difference to Daniel. But it took that threat of suicide for the help to actually be offered. While it hasn't always been easy, Daniel has come away from school with enough GCSEs to get him onto an IT course. And now at 17, he's doing okay. He's enjoying college, and over the last few months, he has been brave enough to go out into society to find his tribe, the kind of people who get him and his quirky ways. And he's got a big social group of friends. He's even got a girlfriend. I'm so proud of my son for everything that he's achieved, despite the challenges that life has set him. There's a few key things that I've learned along the way, and I don't know how many of you here are parents or carers, but I think whether you're a parent, carer or professional, just knowing the sort of things that I've learned might be useful for you. The first thing is that as a parent, you have to be your child's #1 fan. Parenting a child with special needs is hard work, and you face battles every day, from school, from other parents, from medical professionals, from the media and from society. There are plenty of times when I felt like washing my hands of Daniel and just walking away. But, you know, as a parent, you can't do that, can you? You have to be there for him. I have to love my son despite everything he does. I have to love him at his very worst. Because if I can't do it, who else can I expect to do it? I've also learned not to blame anyone for my son's condition. You know, it's not my fault, it's not his fault, it's just one of those things. And as his mum, I need to be there for him and I need to support him, however tired or depressed or frustrated I might be feeling. I've learned to get support for myself and to ask for help when I need it. I think when you parent a child with special needs, it's incredibly lonely, it's incredibly isolating, and finding support for yourself is vital. I love my son dearly, and I wouldn't change him for anything, but parenting him has affected my health, my career, my relationships, and my confidence. I've only survived through having the support of my family and friends, and through meeting other parents in similar situations. In the early days following Daniel's diagnosis, I was an active member of an online support group, and now I attend a local ADHD support group where I meet other parents every month. Whatever disability or condition you're dealing with, there are support groups out there, whether online or in the real world. So, seek out the people who are going through the same things as you, because they understand what life is like for you. They know what you're going through, and just knowing that you're not alone can be a huge source of comfort. And don't be afraid to ask family and friends for help either, because just having an hour to yourself every now and then can make such a difference to your personal well-being. It can make life much easier to cope with. It might sound strange, but I've also learned to remember to have fun. We've been through some tough times, and it's all too easy to get caught up in the never-ending routine of medication, meetings, CAMS appointments, and so on. And you can forget that at the heart of it is your cherished little child. They don't stay children for very long. I mean, my son is up here now, not a boy anymore. Reminding myself to make the most of him, especially on the good days, has been really important for the sanity of our family. And finally, I'd recommend that every parent does their research. It's all too easy for medical and educational professionals to fob you off when they think you don't know what you're talking about. When Daniel had his first permanent school exclusion, I went along with it because I didn't know there were any other options. Of course, when I did my research, I found there were loads of things that the school could have tried, but because I didn't know about them, I didn't put up any resistance. Read as much as you can about your child's condition, find out what the school should be doing to help, keep up to date with research, and educate yourself about what support is available. When you speak from a position of power and knowledge, it's much more difficult for the professionals to ignore you. And you'll have more success in getting support for your child on a regular basis, rather than just when things hit rock bottom. And I think that's the message of my story. All too often, children with special needs and their families are set up to fail, and support's only offered as a way of picking up the pieces. Instead, let's work together to ensure our kids are supported to succeed in education, in society, and in life. Thank you very much.